So while Congress squabbled over the next round of stimulus money, President Trump signed 4 executive orders on August 8th of 2020. Now, some question the constitutionality of the actions, while others say, well, hey, at least he did something. So what did he do? Well, you're about to find out in today's episode of Lawyer Up. I'm Joshua Roberts, attorney at law, and you are watching Lawyer Up. In today's episode, we're going to look at the 4 executive orders that President Trump just signed, and we're going to talk about what's in them, and maybe just as importantly, we're going to talk about what wasn't included and what will still be left for Congress maybe to deal with regarding the stimulus package or stimulating the economy in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. Hey, do me a favor. If you enjoy the episode, hit that like button. If you have something to say, comment below. If you want to learn more, subscribe to the channel. And let me tell you, over the past 6 weeks, I've seen several videos come out on stimulus packages and stimulus money, when in reality, Congress hasn't been doing anything. These videos are simply clickbait. My promise to you, if you subscribe to this channel, is that I will not put out clickbait. I'm not going to put out a video just for likes or views if nothing has happened. When you see a video from me, you know that somebody, whether it's Congress or the President, has taken some sort of action that is significant to your life. And last but not least, I appreciate it if you would share me on social media. So let's talk a little bit about the history here. Now, we all know we're in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic, and in March of 2020, the Congress passed the CARES Act, and it was signed into law by the President, and it was a basically $3 trillion stimulus package for the United States economy. Since that time, there have been 3 other additional stimulus packages passed. The most significant stimulus action that did not pass was the HEROES Act, and that was proposed by the Democrats. It passed the House of Representatives, but it did not pass the Senate. And this was a $3.4 trillion package that basically, at this point, is dead in the water. From there, the Republicans just proposed the HEALS Act. And this is a $1 trillion, much smaller package, but nonetheless a stimulus package for the U.S. economy. Now, the HEALS Act was sponsored by the Republicans, and it has met some conflict by the Democrats. And over the past several weeks, nothing has really materialized for this 5th round of stimulus money. So, in the absence of congressional action, President Donald Trump has done 4 things, signed 4 executive orders regarding the stimulus to the economy. And what's truly interesting about these executive orders are that they are constitutionally questionable. Generally, Congress or the legislative branch, they have to pass laws. They have to appropriate money. They're the branch of government that does those sorts of things. Executive orders are traditionally reserved for the president in the executive branch of government. So they administer government. In effect, the president is the chief executive officer or the CEO of, say, America in this instance. And they can have executive orders which dictate how programs are administered, but they don't generally make law. They don't appropriate funds for laws. So this is a constitutionally questionable activity. However, it's extremely interesting from a legal perspective as to what the president has done and how he proposes to fund it. So let's talk about what happened. There were 4 executive orders signed, and the first one was a payroll tax cut for those making under $100,000 a year. Now, there's 2 components to this particular payroll tax cut. Traditionally, when you get your paycheck, there's some money that is deducted out of that as part of payroll taxes. There's also a matching component that your employer has to pay. Now, it's not entirely clear how this payroll tax moratorium will play out, but it looks like the money that the government traditionally takes out of your paycheck, or at least part of your paycheck, is going to be left in for you as increased income. It also appears that that matching portion that the employer has to pay, that will be deferred. It doesn't say that it will be forgiven, but it will be deferred until after the first of the year. Now, some employers may take advantage of this, some may not. It sounds to me like 6 months of withholding these funds and not paying over to the government is a recipe to get you into tax trouble. But nonetheless, if employers need that under this executive order, they're allowed to not pay the money over to the government and to withhold it at least through the end of the year. Now, the second executive order from the president was the $400 supplement to state unemployment benefits. Now, as most of you know, there has been a $600 federal supplement on top of whatever each state pays. And every state has their own individual unemployment rate and system and how they calculate benefits. But the federal government, up until August 1st, had been augmenting that or supplementing that every week at $600. Well, that expired. However, under the executive order from President Trump, the federal government is now going to supplement $400. Now, there's a weird catch here in that each state has to pay 25% or $100 of that. The state has to pay that first, and then the federal government will step in and pay the other 75% or $300. Now, the really interesting thing about this particular executive order is that the president doesn't have the ability to appropriate funding for this. So what he has done, and this is somewhat clever, is say that there are previously appropriated funds under the CARES Act that aren't being used. And so he's going to refurbish or reappropriate these funds that Congress has already approved to be used for stimulus purposes. And he's going to repurpose those funds to be used in the unemployment context. So the extra $400 a week is going to be for those people who are unemployed, who qualify, through the rest of 2020. The third executive order from President Trump puts a stay on student loan payments throughout the rest of the year. Now, these are not forgiveness. This is just what's called a forbearance. So essentially a payment that somebody owes to the federal government for student loans for, say, August or September or October. They don't have to make those payments. Now, they don't go away. They're just removed and added to the end of the loan. So essentially the amount of payments that you have are going to be the same, just the loan term is going to be extended beyond the original end of it. So they're basically moving payments from 2020 and adding them to the end of these student loans. Last but not least, the fourth executive order from President Trump put a moratorium on evictions. Now, this is not all evictions. These are only evictions where the landlords are participating in some sort of a federal program. They receive federal funds. However, it's significant because there are a lot of federal housing programs for people that are at or below the poverty level. And this helps those people because it puts an extended moratorium on evictions. So if they can't make those payments, they can't make those mortgage payments or the rental payments, then they can't be evicted or foreclosed upon, at least in the foreseeable future. Now we change gears and we talk about what the president did not order in his series of executive orders. And there's essentially 6 areas that Congress will still need to address that the president did not address in those executive orders of August 8th. Number 1 is the PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Program for small businesses. There have been a lot of talk in Congress that there would be a second round of applications and benefits for those businesses that were the hardest hit. And we're talking about entertainment businesses like movie theaters, like water parks or adventure parks, like bars. These are the businesses that were permanently shut down that really need a second round of funding. That was not included in President Trump's executive orders. Second area that wasn't included that is of significance was the talk about helping schools and universities reopen. Schools are required to have all these types of masking and face shields and equipment to do fogging and all types of things to disinfect. A lot of additional expenses that these schools were expecting and hoping to get federal funds for. These were not included in the executive orders and still something that Congress can address going forward. The third area not addressed was for expanded COVID testing in schools and nursing homes and child care facilities. These are areas where you have people kind of piled on top of each other as the nature of the beast and what these things do. And there have been a lot of talk in Congress about providing money for these entities to do expanded testing. That wasn't addressed by President Trump and is still out there for Congress to look at. The fourth area of concern is additional funding for research and development for a COVID vaccine, as well as a request from our first responders that they need additional funding for personal protective equipment. There has been an expanded need for the additional PPE equipment with first responders, and they have been looking to Congress to fund that. The president didn't address it, and it's still out there. Number 5 is the liability protection issue. Employers, schools, churches, those types of entities are looking for a protection, a statutory prohibition against suing them if somebody gets COVID-19 while they're attending one of their functions or working there. Now, there would be exceptions to this liability protection. If there was an intentional exposure or reckless exposure, then you could still sue your employer or your church or whatever. However, the last thing a lot of these businesses need when they're trying to reopen is a bunch of lawsuits from people. And so there has been serious discussion about providing them with liability protection. This wasn't addressed by President Trump and is still available for discussion in Congress. And last but not least, what you tuned in for, the talk about the stimulus check. The president did not, in his executive order any stimulus checks sent out to anybody. There's a good question as to whether he could even do that. There wasn't enough money to be repurposed that he could actually use CARES Act money to send out stimulus checks. So that's something Congress is going to have to address. Now, the bad news is they seem to be unable to agree on how to move forward. The good news is that both Republicans and Democrats agree that Americans need another stimulus check. So I think you can look forward to, at some point in time in the future, an additional check. They have also talked about $1,200 being reasonable, and both sides seem to agree on that amount. So that is probably forthcoming. Now, it wasn't part of Donald Trump's executive orders, and it is not passed through Congress. But it's on the horizon and something you could look forward to probably in the next 45 days, I would estimate. So that's the episode on the executive orders from Donald Trump from August 8th of 2020. I hope you enjoyed the update. If you did, hit that like button. If you have a question or a comment, put that down below. If you want to learn more about legal issues and or these types of announcements with acts of Congress or the president that affect you financially, subscribe to the channel. And last but not least, I always love it when you share me on social media. Again, thank you for watching. I'm Joshua Roberts, attorney at law, and you've been watching Lawyer Up.
Send lawyers, guns, and money. Dad, get me out of this.